They were not stupid. They were not weak. They survived ice ages, volcanic winters, and predators that would have ended most species. They buried their dead, made jewelry, used pigments, and crafted tools of genuine sophistication. Their brains were slightly larger than ours. They endured for 300,000 years, 3 times longer than our species has existed in its current form. And then, 40,000 years ago, the last one died, alone. That word, alone, turns out to be the entire story. A study published in April 2026 by an international team of researchers has proposed something that reframes everything we thought we understood about Neanderthal extinction. They did not lose to us in combat. They were not wiped out by disease we carried. They were not simply outcompeted by smarter, faster, more adaptable rivals. The research suggests they were destroyed by something far quieter, far more human, and far more devastating than any of those explanations. They were isolated. And isolation, compounded across thousands of years, is a death sentence for any species. Before we go further, pause on that for a moment, because isolation is not a dramatic, cinematic end. There is no final battle in this story, no catastrophic event, no villain, just the slow, quiet, grinding accumulation of being alone in a world that keeps getting harder. If that sounds familiar in any way, hold that thought, because by the end of this video, you will understand why it should. The researchers used spatial modeling techniques borrowed from digital ecology to map Neanderthal population distribution across Europe over time. What they found was a pattern of small, geographically isolated communities, groups rarely numbering more than a few dozen individuals, that maintained almost no meaningful contact with other Neanderthal groups beyond their immediate territory. No long-distance trade, no information networks crossing significant distances, no alliance systems, no resource sharing, no way of absorbing a crisis by drawing on the resilience of a broader connected community. Imagine living your entire life, your entire world, as 30 or 40 people in a valley. Everyone you have ever known, everyone you will ever know. No news from outside, no traders arriving with food from distant regions, no wanderers bringing new ideas, new techniques, new hope. Just your small group, your territory, your resources. And when those resources fail, as resources eventually always fail, there is nobody to call, nowhere to turn, nothing beyond the edges of what you already have. That was the Neanderthal reality, and it was a trap they could not see, because they had never known anything else. While this was happening, Homo sapiens were building something completely different. Flexible, far-reaching social networks that spanned enormous distances. Communities trading goods and information across hundreds of miles. Young people moving between groups, carrying knowledge, skills, and genetic diversity with them. Alliance systems that meant when one community faced a crisis, a failed hunting season, a disease outbreak, a harsh winter, other communities in the network could help absorb the shock. Think about what that actually meant in practice. A Homo sapiens group in crisis could send a runner to an allied community 3 days away. They could trade surplus mammoth meat from a good hunt for flint tools they could not make themselves. They could send their daughters and sons to marry into neighboring groups, keeping genetic diversity alive, keeping relationships alive, keeping the network alive. They could receive warning of a harsh season approaching from people who had already lived through it further north. Their world was vast. Their options were many. Their resilience was built into the very structure of how they lived. Neanderthal networks were the opposite. Fragile, regionally limited, genetically closed. Here is the mechanism that makes this so devastating. When environmental pressure hit a Homo sapiens community, and the late Pleistocene delivered environmental pressure relentlessly, the network caught them. When environmental pressure hit a Neanderthal community, they faced it with whatever 30 or 40 people they had around them. No partners to call on, no network to absorb the shock. Just the small, closed, isolated group, and whatever the crisis threw at it. Over tens of thousands of years, small isolated groups blink out, one by one, quietly, not in dramatic last battles, not swept away in a single catastrophic event. A disease takes a community here. A brutal winter breaks another there. A failed breeding season ends a third. Each one facing its final crisis in silence, with no network to save it. Until eventually, across the whole of Europe and Western Asia, there are no communities left anywhere. The last Neanderthal was not killed by a Homo sapiens spear. The last Neanderthal most likely died of something ordinary. Cold, hunger, a wound that would not heal. The end of a species that had survived 300,000 years came not with a roar, but with silence. The silence of a community too small, too isolated, too alone to survive one more crisis. The genetics confirm it with uncomfortable precision. The University of Manchester study on Neanderthal DNA showed patterns of long-term inbreeding consistent with exactly the kind of small, closed populations the 2026 modeling research describes. Generation after generation of close relatives reproducing within the same tight group. Reduced genetic diversity. Compromised immune function. Bodies less able to fight disease. Minds less exposed to new ideas. Communities less capable of innovation. Progressive vulnerability building slowly and invisibly, across centuries, until the margin for survival narrowed to nothing. And here is the question that the evidence demands, but cannot fully answer. Was Neanderthal isolation a choice, or a cognitive limitation? Did they simply lack the social architecture to build far-reaching networks? Or did they have that capacity and never develop it? Because for hundreds of thousands of years they never needed to, until suddenly, catastrophically, it was too late. We do not know. The fossil record cannot show us the interior of a relationship. What the evidence shows is the outcome. The species that maintained broad, flexible, resilient connections across the landscape survived. The species that did not, did not. We know that Homo sapiens and Neanderthals did interbreed. Most people of non-African ancestry carry 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA today, evidence of real encounters, real relationships that cross the species boundary. But those encounters happened within a context of Homo sapiens' expansion and connectivity. We absorbed them into our networks. They could not do the same in return. The architecture simply was not there. Think about what the defining advantage of our species actually was. At the moment it mattered most in human history. Not intelligence, not physical capability, not tool sophistication or brain size or cold weather adaptation. The defining advantage was connection, the willingness, or ability, to maintain relationships with people who were not immediately in front of us, to trust strangers, to build and sustain alliances across distance, to stay connected even when geography made connection difficult and dangerous. That is what separated a species that is still here from one that is not. And here is what makes this finding reach far beyond the prehistoric past and into something that should genuinely unsettle you. The World Health Organization declared loneliness a global public health crisis in 2024. Research consistently shows that isolated communities, human communities, right now, in the modern world, are less resilient, less adaptable, and more vulnerable to crisis than connected ones. The mechanism that ended the Neanderthals did not disappear 40,000 years ago. We did not solve it. We did not evolve past it. It is not a prehistoric problem with a prehistoric solution. We are still living inside it, and the Neanderthals, those sophisticated, capable, tragically isolated people, are still trying to tell us something important about what happens when connection breaks down. The last Neanderthal died alone. That is not a detail at the edge of the story. That is the whole story. Next week, artificial intelligence just did something to one of the most sacred and studied sets of ancient documents ever discovered. And what it found has stunned the academic world. The Dead Sea Scrolls have been examined by scholars for over 70 years. Experts thought they understood when they were written, who wrote them, and what they meant for the history of both Judaism and Christianity. Then a new AI model, trained on the confirmed handwriting of known scroll authors, began redating dozens of fragments, without touching them, without damaging them, and placing some of them decades earlier than anyone had assumed. If those dates are confirmed, what we thought we knew about the very origins of biblical religion may have to be rewritten from the beginning. That is our next video. And the implications are far bigger than the headlines have been willing to admit. Calibrated Past, where ancient evidence meets modern science.